July 24th, 1997. Somewhere in the mountains above Lander, Wyoming, Amy Wroe Bechtel vanished. Her white Toyota Tercel was found abandoned near Burnt Gulch. Unlocked, keys inside, to-do list on the seat. The runner was gone. For nearly 3 decades, investigators, family members, journalists, and researchers have tried to answer the same question. What happened to Amy? The investigation focused on her husband. Years later, investigators began looking hard at a convicted killer. Others argued Amy was simply lost in the wilderness. But 29 years later, no one has been arrested. No one has ever been charged. Amy has never been found. And the most important questions remain unanswered. Not who do we suspect, not who seems possible, but what does the evidence actually tell us? Tonight, we reach the final reckoning. After 4 episodes, thousands of pages of reporting, decades of investigation, and countless unanswered questions, we're going to do something remarkably simple. We're going to put the theories aside. We're going to follow the evidence, and we're going to ask, what can we honestly conclude about the disappearance of Amy Wroe Bechtel? Welcome back, listeners, to Rocky Mountain Reckoning, the series where we return to the crimes rooted deep in the dirt and snow of the American West, the ones that never left the hearts of the people who lived through them.
We investigate the stories buried underneath snowfall, prairie dust, and decades of unanswered questions. The ones whispered through cattle fences, past broken barbed wire, and across wind-lashed highways.
I'm your host, John.
And I'm Angela.
This is episode 4 of our investigation into the disappearance of Amy Wroe Bechtel. Over the last 3 episodes, we've examined who Amy was, we've reconstructed the events of July 24th, 1997, and we've explored the investigation that followed her disappearance, including how quickly the investigation began centering on Amy's husband, Steve, and what may have been lost while they did it. Tonight, we reach the final question of this series. After nearly 3 decades, after thousands of search hours, after multiple investigative theories, suspects, speculation, and countless unanswered questions, what can we honestly conclude? Not what we hope happened, not what we fear happened, not what fits a preferred theory. What does the evidence actually support?
And just as importantly, what doesn't it support?
Because Amy's case remains unsolved. No arrest, no recovery, no definitive answers. But that doesn't mean all explanations carry equal weight. So tonight, we're going to examine the competing theories, revisit the evidence, explore the pathways that were followed and the ones that weren't, and ask what Amy's case still has to teach us nearly 30 years later.
And whether the answers might have looked very different if the investigation had taken a different path.
This is the final reckoning in the disappearance of Amy Wroe Bechtel. Now, before we continue, if you value long-form evidence-based investigations, consider joining us on Patreon. Every week, we release additional content through the Dark Docket, including case discussions, investigative follow-ups, research deep dives, and conversations that don't always fit inside the main show. Your support helps fund records requests, research materials, travel, interviews, and the continued development of victim-centered investigations across the Dark Dialogue Network.
You can also find case files, episode resources, victim information, and additional content on the Dark Dialogue website.
And if you'd like to support the mission in another way, consider our Adoptive Victim Initiative and the other projects dedicated to preserving the stories of victims who might otherwise be forgotten.
Every follow, share, review, and recommendation helps more people discover these cases and helps us continue giving voices to the voiceless.
Now let's return to Amy, because before we can evaluate what likely happened, we need to start with a deceptively simple question. How alone was Amy really on the loop road that afternoon? One of the assumptions that quietly shaped this case from the very beginning is that Amy disappeared somewhere remote, somewhere isolated, somewhere with no witnesses. And in broad terms, the Shoshone National Forest is remote. But remote doesn't mean empty. And when you actually pull the witness accounts apart, the picture that emerges looks very different from what the word isolated usually implies. Let's start with the most important witness in this section, County Mechanic Earl Osborne. On July 24th, 1997, Osborne was driving the loop road for a legitimate reason. He was heading up the mountain to repair a fire truck at a youth camp. And while driving up, Osborne reported seeing a blonde female runner wearing clothing consistent with Amy's known running attire. And importantly, he wasn't alone in that observation. An unnamed road surveyor working independently in the same area that afternoon reported seeing a woman matching that same description. Two separate people, two separate reasons for being on that road, both placing a woman matching Amy's description in the same area during the same window. That's independent corroboration. These are not witnesses who were together and reinforcing each other's memory. They were there for different reasons and they saw the same thing. Then comes the detail that becomes very significant later in this episode. On his return trip down the mountain, Osborne observed a bluish-green vehicle, which he said was possibly a van, stopped in the roadway. The vehicle was never publicly identified. The driver was never publicly identified. The stop was never explained, and it sits there in the evidentiary record unresolved. Now, a stopped vehicle on the loop road would not automatically stand out to somebody that was driving through. People stop to fish, to scout terrain, to deal with equipment. Stopped vehicles are not inherently suspicious in that environment, but when Amy Wroe Bechtel disappears without explanation on that same route during that same afternoon, and the vehicle observed during the critical window is never identified or eliminated, it becomes a loose thread that can never be tied off. And there are other threads too. Jim and Wendy Gibson drove the loop road that afternoon with relatives, and on their return, Wendy Gibson caught a glimpse of what most investigators believe was Amy's white Toyota Tercel parked near the Burnt Gulch area. But there's another detail from the Gibsons that really has received far less attention. And we've talked about it and how they reported that gray truck partially loaded with firewood with the shirtless man standing nearby. At a minimum, that places at least one additional unidentified person near Burnt Gulch during the critical window. And that person was never fully identified or accounted for in the investigation. So when you lay all of this out together, Osborne placing a runner matching Amy's description on the route, the surveyor independently confirming the same, an unidentified bluish-green vehicle stopped on that route, Amy's vehicle near Burnt Gulch, the gray truck, the shirtless man, camp and recreational activity in that whole corridor, a picture emerges that directly contradicts the assumption that Amy disappeared in isolation.
Yeah.
That loop road was not empty.
Sounds like a lot was going on.
Yeah, it's July in Wyoming on the mountain.
A lot's going on.
A very accessible mountain, a very accessible part of the mountain. You know, campgrounds are there. And so, yeah, I mean, it's busy for being in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming. It's busy.
It's Wyoming busy.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I want to be exact about what that means and what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that any of those people encountered Amy. It doesn't mean that any of them are responsible for anything. And it doesn't connect any specific vehicle to a crime or anything like that. But what it does mean is the assumption that Amy disappeared in a vacuum, that nobody was around, that no encounter was possible, that there were no witnesses to anything. That assumption is just not supported by the actual witness records. Multiple people were present. Multiple vehicles were present, and many of them, most of them, were never identified, which means the very next question has to be, did investigators preserve the opportunity to identify them?
Did they ask?
No.
If anyone was on the mountain that night? They didn't do a call to action.
No, that's been one of my biggest complaints throughout this is they never identified everybody that was in the area, which is standard protocol, even if it's a missing person.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a murder
Always a
investigation.
news report. If you were in this area during this time, please tell me what you come forward.
Yes.
Tell us what you know.
Yes.
Yeah. And they never did anything of the sort.
Nothing.
Wow.
Never. And it's important to frame it all correctly. And criticism of this investigation is sometimes applied in ways that I think aren't fair, because I've said this from the beginning. The search operation in this case was exceptional. We covered it in
One
detail.
of the biggest in Wyoming.
Right.
Yeah.
National Guard, helicopters, cadaver dogs, the whole thing. So the criticism that I'm about to walk through does not apply to the search at all. It applies to the criminal investigation. And those two things, the search and the criminal investigation, should have been happening simultaneously.
Yeah.
And they were not treated the same way.
They weren't even the same species in this case.
So let's start with the vehicle. Amy's white Toyota Tercel was found near Burnt Gulch in the early morning hours of July 25th. It was the last confirmed physical location that was connected to Amy on that mountain. If there was physical evidence anywhere in this case, trace fibers, fingerprints, biological material, soil transfer, anything like that, that vehicle was the most likely place that they were going to find it.
Yeah.
And it was not treated as a crime scene. Multiple people entered it. Items were handled, the keys, the sunglasses, Amy's to-do list. And then ultimately the car was driven home by the Skinners before it was forensically processed.
At the very least, the car should have been used as a control substance.
Yeah, I mean, it should have been preserved as evidence.
Even if they didn't think there was evidence of another person, it was a control of her. Like, cadaver dogs could smell that car, go look for her. It wasn't tainted with anything else that they would have been looking for.
Right. And it could have contained information relevant to the search.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to somebody being kidnapped, but the to-do list and all, that's important information.
Right.
Why it wasn't preserved, I'll never be able to answer it. And to be fair about the context, investigators arriving at the scene in the early morning hours of July 25th were looking for an injured runner. That was a reasonable first assumption. In that framework, the vehicle maybe wasn't a crime scene. It was a staging point for a search operation, but I cannot understand, and I talked about it in the last episode. I'm not going to just rehash it all here, but why they didn't start a parallel investigation blows my mind.
Yeah.
And the lead cold case investigator on this case now is John Zerga, and he later said that they ruined it with the vehicle. Right. That's not me saying that. That's him saying it.
Now, could they have thought they were maybe saving man hours, saving money by not running parallel? Did they maybe think it was more innocent than it was?
I think that without a doubt, they thought it was more innocent than it was. And under that framework, I still have a hard time. But
I know. I threw out some devil's advocate for you.
And that's fine. Under that framework, you could make the argument that what they blew with the vehicle in hindsight looks worse than it would have looked at the time. By not recognizing everybody that's in the area, by not setting up roadblocks and questioning people, identifying every vehicle that was leaving and coming in, I got nothing on that. That is inexcusable.
Yeah, I wasn't justifying it. I was just
No, but I think you make a rational comment. And like I said, I think that comment could maybe be applied to the vehicle. I think it was a huge blunder. But one could say, okay, I can understand. They didn't process it as a crime scene because they didn't think they had a crime. It's kind of nuts to think that way because you don't know you have a crime until you found the body.
Right.
But
you don't know you don't. It's Schrodinger's cat. You don't know you don't have a crime.
Right.
Until you find.
Yeah. And investigative standards, especially, I mean, this was not that long ago. This was 30 years ago. This was 1997. This is not 1923.
No.
So investigative standards, even at that time, were treat everything as a homicide until you prove it's not. Like that. And it should have been. But give them the benefit of the doubt on the car. You still have to explain why you wouldn't want to identify witnesses to a missing person. And I cannot rectify that. Or
at least have an officer drive it to the police station so you have one what is that, chain of custody?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as the Skinners drove that car away, chain of custody is broken.
Yeah.
Now,
they could have implanted anything.
If there is a conviction in this case, everything from that car is likely getting thrown out of court because chain of custody was broken. Now we can't prove that Todd and Amy didn't put it in the car, that Steve didn't put it in the car.
Not that we assume that they did, but...
Well, no, and it doesn't matter because we never found any evidence. But if they would have, it probably would have been thrown out because you cannot maintain the chain of custody. And then there was the footprint, a shoe print in the dirt near Amy's vehicle, which potentially matched her Adidas Trail Response running shoes. It was observed by searchers early in the operation, and it was destroyed before it could be photographed or cast or preserved in any way. So we can't know whose print that was.
I just always picture those things in movies when they put a dollar bill next to it and take a picture.
For scale, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's real. That really happens. Yeah. You know?
But they didn't do that.
No, they didn't even take a picture of it, let alone a cast.
Nothing.
It may have been Amy's. It might have belonged to a searcher and somebody that was totally unrelated, but that is precisely the problem. Investigators lost the opportunity to find out where in the hell it fits in. Mm-hmm. A confirmed print in Amy's shoe pattern moving in a particular direction would have been useful even in a search operation. A print alongside hers that didn't match her pattern would have been transformative. Both possibilities disappeared when the evidence disappeared. And beyond the vehicle and the footprint, there was the broader issue of the corridor itself. No perimeter was established around the scene. No vehicle checkpoint was set up. The road remained totally open to the public. Vehicles continued moving through that area. Anyone who had been there on July the 24th was free to leave without ever being stopped, without being identified, without being asked a single freaking question. In a case where we already know multiple unidentified people and vehicles were present in that window, that is a profound loss. Mm-hmm. And apply the pressure test. Imagine a single scenario. A person parked near Burnt Gulch that afternoon, completely innocent, just cutting firewood, but they saw something while they were there. Yeah. An interaction, an unfamiliar vehicle, a person who seemed out of place.
Heard a random noise.
Something.
Yeah.
If investigators had controlled that road in the hours after Amy was reported missing, then that person gets stopped. They get asked questions. Mm-hmm. Maybe they saw nothing relevant, but maybe they saw everything and don't even realize it. But nobody stopped them. Nobody asked. And then there's also the investigative leadership issue. As we've established, lead investigator Dave King was away on a horseback trip when Amy disappeared, and he was not immediately available. During the most critical evidentiary window, the first hours, the first day, the first week, the formal investigative leadership structure appears to have been totally unclear. Fremont County is not Boston, Massachusetts, or New York City or something like that. It is not as familiar with serious crimes as some other jurisdictions. It's one of the most familiar in the state of Wyoming, but the accumulation of decisions that were made during those first days, the vehicle, the footprint, the open road, the uncontrolled scene, suggests that nobody was coordinating decisions with any kind of urgency that a potential crime scene absolutely demands. And here's the central point. No single mistake in those first 72 hours was necessarily catastrophic by itself. Each one individually is survivable. The vehicle, understandable, given the rescue mindset. The footprint, an unfortunate accident of search activity. The open road, maybe a resource question, but when you take them all together, what those decisions created was a series of permanently closed doors. The vehicle's contaminated, the footprint's gone, the unidentified people gone forever. The unidentified vehicles are gone forever. And once an opportunity is lost in an investigation, it never comes back. Mm-hmm. So while those opportunities were disappearing at the scene, investigators were simultaneously beginning to narrow their focus, which brings us to the question of what that narrowing cost. let me set this up carefully. We established in episode 3 that investigators were right to scrutinize Steve Bechtel. Spouses and intimate partners are statistically the most important starting point in disappearances or murders or whatever. That's not a bias. That's evidence-based investigative practice. The question that we're asking tonight isn't whether investigators should have looked at Steve. It's whether, while they were looking at Steve, alternative pathways received far less attention than they deserved. We've already established that the loop road wasn't empty on July 24th. Multiple unidentified people, multiple unidentified vehicles, a scene that was partially compromised before anybody thought to preserve it, a complete disappearance with no forensic anchor connecting anybody to the crime. All of that opens what investigators would call a stranger offender possibility. The idea that Amy may have encountered somebody outside her immediate circle, someone whose presence on that road had nothing to do with her specifically until it did. That category is very broad. Unknown stranger, local acquaintance, opportunistic encounter, a predator who worked a corridor. But within that category, there is one name that stands apart from every other alternative ever proposed in this case, and I bet you know who that is.
Joy. Do you want me to say it?
Mm-hmm.
Dale Wayne Eaton.
The asshat himself. And I want to be clear about who Eaton is, as if anybody doesn't know.
Yeah.
But
if you've been here for a minute, you know who he is.
He was convicted for the 2004 murder of Lisa Marie Kimmel. His criminal methodology involved a roadside victim selection in rural Wyoming. He operated across a corridor of geography that overlaps with Amy's, and his known patterns of behavior, the use of vehicles, the rural environment, a predatory roadside approach are consistent with the kind of encounter
ballsy
that would explain Amy's disappearance. But here's what matters most for this segment, and this point is critical. Eaton did not enter Amy's case because somebody on the internet made a connection years later. He entered this case because his own brother, Richard, called investigators in September of 1997 and said he thinks his piece of shit brother's guilty. And at the time that Richard made the call, Dale Wayne Eaton wasn't publicly known as a murderer. The Lisa Marie Kimmel case wasn't solved yet. It wouldn't be solved for several more years. Nobody outside of law enforcement was talking about him. This was a family member from the inside raising concerns about a relative in connection with Amy's disappearance.
Big red flag.
That kind of information
Big red flag
from that kind of source in the context of an unsolved missing persons case is not a tip that you just close with a brief alibi check or some shit like that.
It's not a case of sibling rivalry that day.
Right. And then we know that in September of that year, Dale Wayne Eaton attempted to abduct the Breeden family near Patrick Draw along Interstate 80 in rural Wyoming, about 3 hours or so away from Lander.
Are you reading my mind? Because I was just about to ask you the timeline on that. How close was it?
So July 24th to, I think it was like September 7th or September 8th. So a month and some change.
Yeah.
He approached the Breeden family on a remote roadway. He got them into his car. He pulled a gun on them and he tried to kidnap them. It was a man, his wife, and their baby. And I tried so hard to get a description of her because I was very curious to know if she matched the same physical characteristics as Lisa Marie Kimmel and Amy Wroe Bechtel. And I couldn't get one, but I did confirm her age range was the same. I think she was, and I'm just going off memory, but I think she was roughly 18. She was very young. Very young.
Now, side note, does it match any of the Jane Does that we kind of know what might have looked like?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it matches the Elko County Jane Does very closely.
Okay.
So
he had a type.
Well, if he was guilty for the Elko Jane Does, yes. If he was guilty for Amy and Lisa, I think we can say that he had a type.
Okay.
What we know for an absolute fact is he was guilty of kidnapping the Breeden family, or attempting to, before they beat the piss out of him. And
go Breeden family.
Yes. And he was guilty for killing Lisa Marie Kimmel. So again, I couldn't find the physical description of the Breeden wife. I think her name was Shannon.
That's kind of odd that you couldn't find.
There's nothing.
Did they just fall off the planet afterwards, or?
No, they didn't just fall off the planet. There's plenty of articles and court records about her testifying in his criminal proceedings. I'm pretty sure that she came back to testify in his appeal when he tried to get out of the Lisa Marie Kimmel murder and the death sentence and all of that whole thing we went through in her case. But what there isn't is pictures or a physical description.
There's not one piece of media about it.
Not as far as pictures go, not that I could find.
And you dive
physical
deep when
description.
You want to.
I really tried.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really important, but the information just isn't publicly available. If it's
shocked.
Sure, it's in a police report somewhere, but I couldn't get it. But
is it important enough to FOIA request that? What did she look like?
I'm probably gonna because I'm so, I don't know, hung up on Dale Wayne Eaton. I'm probably gonna file some FOIA requests in relevant cases, but I suspect her age matches. I'd be very surprised if her appearance isn't at least similar. It seems like he had a preference for young blonde women, but we can't say that for sure. But what is very important about, and I'll see if you pick this up, what's very important about the Breeden family kidnapping is Eaton was driving an off-green van when he attempted to kidnap that family.
So the blue-green vehicle.
Earl Osborne observed on the loop road that day a bluish-green vehicle, which he said possibly was a van, stopped in the roadway on Amy's running route during that critical window.
I passed the test.
Yeah, good job. Now, I want to be precise about what that comparison does and it doesn't establish, because it doesn't establish that the vehicle Osborne saw was Eaton's van. No witness identified Dale Wayne Eaton on the loop road that day. There was no license plate information, no forensic evidence that connects this pile of shit to Amy's disappearance. What it establishes, though, is that two vehicle descriptions independently documented in the same state, a month and some change apart, are very consistent. And that consistency layered over his brother's contemporaneous tip that Dale knew the area and was in the area during the same time. We know that even at that point, we know that he was a violent predator that would kidnap a family.
Yeah.
I think that it creates something that an investigator is obligated to take seriously, not should have looked into.
Yeah, why aren't there alarm bells going off?
I think that this is negligence when we're talking about why he wasn't pursued in 1997. Now, given what we know about the son of a bitch now, it's even worse, because now we know he's a murderer. In almost any other investigation we don't know anything, and somebody comes up and says, okay, this guy was in the area. He recently kidnapped a family. He drives a vehicle that matches a witness vehicle. Any investigator's gonna be like, holy shit, we gotta talk to this guy.
Ding, ding. Yeah.
He's in jail right now. He's not hard to locate. Drive your lazy ass down to Sweetwater County and have a chat with the man at the very least.
Yeah.
But the available records suggest that this lead received almost no follow through. Investigators reportedly accepted a family alibi and then just moved on. And after the Breeden attack, we know that Eaton's violent predatory behavior in Wyoming was documented at that time. The question of whether his pathway to Amy's case was revisited aggressively really remains difficult to answer from the public record. I cannot say. I know that now after the Svi tips, which if you don't know is a woman whose family owned a property near Manita, she has recently come out and said that She thinks it's at least possible that Amy could be buried on their property, that Dale Wayne Eaton spent a lot of time there. That has really fired up the cold case investigation to look at Eaton. I don't know where that's at. We've tried to reach out to her. She's not interested in an interview. I don't blame her. She can do whatever she wants. I hold nothing against her, whatever. But
the last correspondence I had with her was that, so a correspondence before last was when she was allowed to speak after Fremont County released her, that she would get a hold of us. And just to reach out again, not about them looking for Amy, but just to get her take on Dale Wayne Eaton, because she grew up with him in her orbit.
Right.
I don't know. Well, I mean, she didn't tell me I couldn't say this. So she said she had done a documentary for Hulu and quite frankly was done talking about the man.
Yeah.
So,
and I don't blame her.
I don't
either.
I mean, how much time has she probably spent talking and talking and talking on this Hulu thing? Because Hulu's going to talk and talk and talk.
And investigators, I'm sure they've interviewed her extensively.
Yeah. I
know that Cowboy State Daily interviewed her. Yeah. I'm sure she's just like, I've had enough. She
does know that if she does want to speak, we're here.
Yes, 100%. And if she doesn't, we totally respect that.
She also knows that if she's allowed to and willing to let us poke around her property, we want to.
100%.
So
yes. Before we keep going, I want to take a second to talk about something that matters beyond the episode itself. At Dark Dialogue, we've built something called the Adopt a Victim program. The goal is simple: to keep attention on the victims themselves, not just the case, and find answers for those stories without them. Because once the headlines fade, most people are forgotten. This is one way to make sure that doesn't happen. If that's something that you want to be a part of, you can find it on the website along with the rest of the Dark Dialogue Network. All right, so let's get back into this. We know that John Zerga, the cold case investigator on this case, has publicly named Eaton as a significant suspect in Amy's disappearance, and he has acknowledged that the alternative pathway has not been developed with sufficient intensity. That's the investigator's conclusion, not mine, which I think carries a lot of weight. It's just agreeing
that's your theme
with me.
Tonight. That is so-and-so, not mine.
It is, because
I know.
Everybody knows how I
just
feel.
Calling you out on it.
Everybody knows how I feel about this piece of shit.
Oh, yeah.
And so me saying Dale Wayne Eaton's a piece of shit doesn't mean a whole lot at this stage. But when you have...
It's the John that cried wolf.
Well, when you have the lead investigator saying essentially the same thing, then it does carry a lot of weight, And
puts a little pep in your step.
It does, yeah. And the most important finding in this segment is not that Dale Wayne Eaton killed Amy Wroe Bechtel. That conclusion far exceeds the evidence that we have.
Yeah.
The most important finding is that a viable stranger offender pathway existed, one supported by contemporaneous information, documented violent behavior, geographical relevance, and a later investigator's own assessment, and that pathway never received even close to the same investigative intensity as the theory that was centered around Steve Bechtel.
And his own damn family saying he's a piece of shit. Go look at him.
Right. What might have been found if we had? We'll never know.
Yeah.
What we can do is apply the same evidentiary standard to every theory that we're going to talk about. So this is where we apply that same standard to every explanation in Amy's case. Not the same sympathy, not the same media attention, not the same emotional weight, the same evidentiary standard. Every theory has to answer the same questions. Does it explain Amy's disappearance? Does it explain the complete absence of her recovery? Does it explain what we know about the environment that day? And most critically, how many unsupported assumptions does it require to hold together? The last question matters more than people sometimes realize. A theory that can only function if you accept 6 things you cannot prove is fundamentally weaker than a theory that requires 2. That's not a philosophical point. It's an analytical one. So let's go through them. The first one is the wilderness accident theory. And that theory was the first framework that investigators worked under. Amy was an experienced endurance athlete running in remote mountain terrain. Accidents happen. People fall, weather changes, things go wrong.
Even experienced people.
100%. And I want to acknowledge honestly, that explanation is not inherently unreasonable. We've talked about it extensively. Wyoming can hide people. It is possible to disappear in Wyoming. That is a real documented reality. But let's put it through the test. Supporting the accident theory, we have the kind of remote terrain, challenging elevation, an afternoon thunderstorm moved through that area that day. We know that. There's known hazards in the wilderness, the absence of any confirmed offender. That's what supports the theory. What contradicts it is nearly 30 years of extensive searching, including one of the most capable search and rescue operations that Wyoming has ever mounted to this day. And it produced nothing. No remains, no clothing, no gear, no accident site, no animal scatter evidence, no confirmed trail of movement, nothing. And then there's the behavioral contradiction to this. Amy was not someone who wandered randomly into unfamiliar backcountry. She was on a known route, on a gravel road, scouting a course that she was helping to organize. And in that environment, a wilderness accident that produces a complete and permanent disappearance with no physical trace becomes increasingly difficult to explain as the years start to accumulate. Now, the counter argument is that Wyoming can absolutely conceal people. Remote terrain has hidden remains before, and searchers miss things. I take that seriously, but the question isn't whether the wilderness concealment is possible in the abstract. The question is whether it's the best explanation for this specific case, this specific athlete on this specific route, this specific scale of a search, and this specific duration of absence. And as those factors accumulate, the accident theory doesn't fully collapse, but it really carries a growing explanatory burden. So theory 2 is Steve Bechtel killed her, or a known associate of hers killed her. And this theory is what dominated the investigation for decades. And I want to evaluate it exactly the same way that I evaluate everything else, not through the lens of guilt or innocence, but through the lens of what the evidence actually shows. So what do we have that supports the theory? The statistical reality that intimate partners warrant scrutiny in disappearances, especially those involving women. Steve had an opportunity window within the timeline, investigative concern regarding his journals that, again, have remained unseen by the public. But if they say the shit they claim to say, maybe there's something there. What contradicts the theory? Well, the phone call that was placed from Steve's residence at 4:43 on July 4th is documented in the phone records. That definitely happened. Sam Leitner corroborated Steve's presence with him for most of that day. Negative luminol searches at the house, negative cadaver dog results, negative FBI-assisted forensic examinations, no body recovered, no confirmed crime scene identified, no physical evidence that connected Steve to Burnt Gulch or to any of this, no eyewitness placing Steve with Amy on the loop road, no indictment after a federal grand jury reviewed the evidence, no charges filed in almost 30 years. This is a long list of negatives for a theory that received the majority of the investigative attention across multiple decades. Now, I want to apply a specific pressure test to this theory because I think it's one of the most clarifying exercises in this entire case. If Steve Bechtel was responsible for Amy's disappearance, how did he do it? Not rhetorically, mechanically, step by step. He needs to know where Amy is specifically enough to intercept her in that area. He needs to reach her while maintaining cooperation from Sam Leitner for a huge part of the day. He needs to overpower a physically fit endurance athlete without creating any recoverable crime scene. He then needs to transport her somewhere. He needs to conceal her so effectively that nearly 3 decades of searching by experienced professionals has produced nothing. He needs to manage her vehicle. He needs to return home without creating any traceable pattern. And he needs to accomplish all of this within that timeline that's anchored by that 4:43 phone call and Sam Leitner's corroboration.
He must have eaten his Wheaties that morning.
Well, that's just the thing. The standard response to that analysis is that experienced offenders sometimes act without leaving evidence, that concealment is possible, that investigations don't always produce forensic results, even in confirmed cases. And all of that is true, but those arguments apply to any individual hurdle. The problem in this theory is that we don't have one hurdle. It's the accumulation.
And that would have made Sam an accomplice, and they would have leaned on him, and he should have broke by
After
now.
a freaking 30 years,
Yeah.
that's only one tiny piece. We have...
Especially when, didn't they not really like each other all that much?
Well, Sam Leitner said that him, Amy, and Steve went on a climbing trip to Australia. He argued with Steve for most of the trip and got along much better with Amy.
Yeah. So he's going to be an accomplice into this for 30 years.
Right.
Come on.
And again, that's only one hurdle.
Right.
We've got to get past all of them. The timeline, the vehicle, the body,
But he's a
the
pretty
forensics,
big hurdle.
the witnesses, the
Yeah.
failed searches, the absence of a crime scene over 30 years.
Yeah. You're running a marathon now. I get it.
Each hurdle might individually be explainable, but all of them together simultaneously, that's where the theory begins requiring far more and more unsupported assumptions to even hold together.
Movies aren't even that good.
You know, I talked about that 443 anchor, but we also have at the very least, we also have the 1045-ish anchor where he contacted law enforcement to report her missing. Those are hard and fast anchors that we can confirm from the public record, but we also have additional stuff that isn't in the public record, so I can't act like it is. I think it's in the investigative record, though, and that is the rest of his phone calls, the rest of his phone record, because he claims the investigators, as much as they talk shit about Steve, they never come out and said he was lying about this. He claims he called her family. He claims that he called the hospitals. He claims that he made all kinds of calls. He had other witnesses that said they stopped by the house earlier in the evening, I think sometime around 8 o'clock. So if we can confirm those, that scrunches that time window down even more. And there's the reality of this shit takes time. You've got a 45-minute drive up and a 45-minute drive back. So right there, you take about 2 hours off of your timeline, just in drive time.
Right.
And then you have to explain how nobody saw him. Yeah, we have the campground witness, but we know that she's wrong because she said it happened at 5 o'clock. He's at home at 4:43, 45 minutes away. So something's wrong there.
Yeah.
And she's remained unnamed for 30 years, which is fishy as shit to me, just to be frank.
Yeah.
It's very
Feels like
fishy.
she was invented.
Very fishy. At the end of the day, in all honesty, the Steve theory remains possible. And I'm not saying that it doesn't, but what I am saying is that after 30 years of aggressive investigation, specifically directed at proving this exact point, the evidence developed did not raise to the level of any kind of a charge in this case. And that reality also has to be part of the analysis. They spent considerable time and resources trying to prove that Steve Bechtel killed his wife.
Mm-hmm.
If any evidence existed, I think they would have. And why would he pick this day to do it? Like, I've already talked about the fact that he would have had to have planned this murder.
Yeah.
It couldn't have been a spur of the moment deal. Why pick a day when you have a tiny little time window?
Mm-hmm.
One might say, well, it gives you an alibi. Okay. You
It
also
leaves a
has
lot
to
of
leave
room
a
for
possibility for doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then this assumption is that he just knew where she was. Well, he didn't. He was expecting her home by about the time he was making that phone call, maybe shortly thereafter. But how did he know that he was going to drive up the loop road and find her? Maybe he was going to pass her on her way back home. He didn't arrive at the same time that she arrived up there. Why would he be home making a phone call when he needs to be getting his ass up the loop road to meet and kill his wife?
Yeah.
And then the whole idea that he was able to do this, because keep in mind, they also did the cadaver dogs and luminol in his vehicle, not just in the house. So he somehow transported the body to somewhere. It's very difficult to hide a body.
Yeah.
To have it never be found. It happens, but it's very difficult to do. To think that it's even possible. This is what I come up against in this with Steve Bechtel, is not that he's a good guy. I don't know him. He might be a total asshole. And not that I support him in any way, shape, or form, but the fact that it's not physically possible for him to do it. It's the same conversation that I've had in the Holly Bobo case with Zach Adams. It's not that I think Zach is a good guy.
I was just about to ask you, are they driving the same speeding car?
Yeah, exactly.
Ludicrous speed?
1,200 miles an hour. It almost requires that in this case.
Gone to
almost.
Plaid. Sorry.
But it's very similar. It's not that I think Zach Adams is a good guy.
Yeah.
I think he's a total, well, I can't speak about him now. He's been in prison. Maybe he's changed. But at the time of Holly's murder, he was a total piece of shit.
Yeah.
He was a meth head. He was a drug dealer. Total asshole. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that he needs to be in prison for a crime he didn't commit. True. And there again, I think it's physically impossible.
Yeah.
So I'm not arguing that Steve is a super husband. He might have been a total prick, and they might have ended up getting a divorce later that year or the next. We don't know. Mm-hmm. But that is all irrelevant. Yeah. If he couldn't have possibly done it. And that's the struggle that I have with the investigators. Yeah, focus on Steve, question Steve, do all your shit with Steve. But when you look at the timeline and you start thinking, I don't even know if he could have possibly done this, maybe you need to widen your lens a little bit and consider some alternatives.
And I do realize that there are one-offs, but if he was inclined to do such a thing to the point of planning it as well as he would have need to have planned it and have ludicrous speed car, wouldn't he have done it again or something?
Well, to be technical, no. It has happened that people have killed a spouse and then gotten remarried. But to your point, I have gone there multiple times. And I have nothing from his current wife that says this guy's abusive, he's a total ass, whatever.
He'd have to be something. I would think you'd have to have some sort of inclination that he was.
You know, the sad reality is, and I talked about it in the last episode, so sorry if I'm repeating myself, but
I'm making him repeat himself.
The really hard part for me to get over is we have no real evidence of an abusive or controlling relationship. The concerning thing to me is all of this comes out after law enforcement does this weird ass thing of bring the family in and show them the evidence, which I talked about extensively. Mm-hmm. But after that, that's when the brother said, oh, you know what? There was a time that Amy had bruises and she joked that sometimes Steve gets a little rough. And there is the fact that when we go to a restaurant, she'd look to Steve to see what to order. Is all of that relevant? Yes. But when it doesn't come out until law enforcement has convinced the family that this is the guy that murdered their daughter, you really have to question it. And in my own relationships, I have experienced exactly both of those things. I've been with women that had a bruise and somebody says, you know, what happened? John beat you up? And she'd be like, she'd laugh and say, oh yeah, he gets rough. And it was never anything true. I've never hit a woman in my life ever, but it's a joke. Mm-hmm. And they didn't assume that she was being abused. They laughed.
At that time,
you know, it was a joke. And so was that, because it sounds like that's what it was with the bruises.
And then it gets planted that it might be more.
And this isn't critical of the family. It's critical because the investigators contaminated that witness pool. So now we have to question things. And then I've been in, honestly, the vast majority of the relationships I've been in, if I go out to eat with whoever I'm with, it is very common that women, it's not a jab, it's just a fact. It's very common when you go to a restaurant and a woman picks up the menu, everything looks good and she has a hard time deciding what she wants.
Tell me what I want.
And I have had multiple partners look at me and say, what do I want?
Just make a decision.
I can't decide. And then I say, well, I think that you want the fajitas.
Yeah.
And then they're like, yeah, I think I do. And they'll order the fajitas. It's not, I don't allow you to eat anything different. It's just a normal thing that happens in relationships.
Decisions are hard, damn it.
And so is it that? The problem is we can't say one way or another because like I said, that pool of witnesses has been contaminated. Which brings us to theory number 3, which is the stranger offender theory. And this is by far the broadest of the 3 categories. It includes Dale Wayne Eaton as the strongest named suspect, but it also includes unknown strangers, local acquaintances, opportunistic encounters, and any other unidentified offenders. And I want to be explicit about something. The strength of this theory does not depend on Dale Wayne Eaton. Remove his name entirely, and this whole framework still stands on its own. So the evidence that we have that supports the stranger offender theory is Amy disappeared from a public environment that was accessible to anybody that was driving on that road. There were multiple unidentified people that were present in that corridor. There's multiple unidentified vehicles. No physical evidence places Steve at that scene. The vehicle being left undisturbed is consistent with an encounter that occurred during the run while she was away from the car rather than at the car itself. A roadside encounter allows for a rapid departure with no trace at the vehicle scene. And the complete disappearance is consistent with certain predatory offense patterns, particularly offenders who use vehicles to control their victims and then they relocate them to another area. Mm-hmm. Now, Eaton's specific relevance within this category is he's a documented violent offender that was operating in Wyoming in 97. His known victim selection methodology involves rural roadways. He has a geographic familiarity with this area. According to his own brother, he attempted to kidnap the Breeden family using an off-green van less than 3 months after Amy disappeared. Actually, just over a month. He was later convicted of murder using methodology that matches patterns that are consistent with Amy's case. He refused to cooperate with investigators regarding Amy's disappearance, and he's named as a significant suspect by the current cold case investigator, John Zerga. What contradicts the stranger offender theory? No offender's ever been identified. No eyewitnesses reported an abduction. No forensic evidence confirms any kind of criminal activity like that. There's never been a confession in this case, and Amy's remains have never been located. That last list is real, and I don't minimize it. The absence of anything that we can consider confirmatory evidence to a suspect abductor is a genuine limitation to this theory. But here's the comparison that really matters. That same absence of forensic evidence, of physical confirmation, of a crime scene, it also applies to the Steve theory. After decades of active investigation specifically designed to find that evidence. So when we ask which theory explains more of the unknown evidence while requiring fewer unsupported assumptions, the stranger offender framework accommodates more of the facts more naturally. It doesn't need to explain a compressed timeline. It doesn't need to explain 30 years of negative forensic results at the marital home. It doesn't need to explain how someone managed a crime scene so thoroughly that nothing recoverable remains. It needs a vehicle, a person that's familiar enough with the area to have been there, an opportunity, and an environment that's capable of concealing an outcome. The evidence already provides almost all of those conditions. That doesn't prove that a stranger was responsible for Amy's disappearance. What it means is that when we apply a consistent analytical standard to every theory, the stranger offender framework currently explains the greatest amount of the known evidence while requiring the fewest assumptions that we can't support. And that's where the analysis lands. So this is the moment that this entire arc has been building towards. Not a verdict, not a definitive answer. Amy's case just doesn't allow for that, but an honest accounting of what we know, what we don't know, what still doesn't fit, and what this case teaches us. What we know is that Amy intended to return home on July 24th, 1997. Her to-do list was unfinished. She had calls to make, work to finish, a home to move into. She was planning to be back when Steve returned from climbing that evening, and she vanished instead. Extensive search operations, among the largest in Wyoming history, have failed to locate her. The investigation focused heavily and persistently on Steve for decades. That investigation has never produced a body, a crime scene, a forensic link, or an indictment. Significant investigative opportunities were lost in the early days of the case. The vehicle, the footprint, the scene control, the identification of people and vehicles that were present in that area. We know that a viable stranger offender pathway existed from the earliest stages of the investigation, and it received substantially less investigative attention than the theory that was centered on Steve. And Dale Wayne Eaton remains the strongest named suspect, based on documented violent behavior, geographic relevance, contemporaneous family concerns, and the later public assessment of investigators that have been directly assigned to Amy's case. What we don't know is who encountered Amy. We don't know whether anybody encountered her at all. We don't know whether Dale Wayne Eaton was involved. We don't know whether another offender was involved. We don't know where Amy is. And we don't know what happened after she began her run on the loop road that afternoon. Those are huge unknowns. And I want to sit with them honestly rather than paper over them. Intellectual honesty requires the same discipline as investigative honesty, distinguishing between what we suspect and what we can actually support. So what still doesn't fit? The biggest thing is the complete disappearance. 29 years of searches and nothing. The unidentified vehicles, the bluish-green van, the gray truck, no one has ever conclusively accounted for those. The unidentified individuals, the woodcutter, the surveyor, the people who drove through that corridor on July 24th and have never been systematically identified, the destroyed footprint, the contaminated vehicle, the open road, and the Richard Eaton tip, a family member that was raising concerns in the fall of 1997 before anybody outside law enforcement knew who his brother truly was. That was never pursued with the urgency that it deserved. The last one is the piece that I keep coming back to. And not because I hate this son of a bitch, and not because this proves that he was involved, but because it was available then. It existed. It pointed away from Steve and toward a different possibility, and the window to investigate it when the evidence was the freshest, well, that window is closed. Yeah. So if we rank those theories based on the evidence that was available, when every theory is held to the same standard, the stranger offender theory is by far the most consistent with the known evidence. It naturally accommodates the unidentified vehicles, the unidentified people, the rapid and complete disappearance, the absence of physical evidence that connects Steve to the scene, and the total lack of a recovery of Amy Wroe Bechtel. It requires the fewest unsupported assumptions. The wilderness accident theory remains possible, but it becomes increasingly difficult to reconcile with the complete absence of recovery over almost 30 years of searching, particularly given the scale and the capability of those searches. The Steve Bechtel theory remains possible, but it faces a growing stack of logistical and evidentiary hurdles, and the investigation that pursued it was the most aggressive of the entire case over the longest period of time, and it failed to produce any physical evidence, any forensic connection. It didn't produce a crime scene, and it didn't lead to a charge that would need to move it from a theory to a case. And that ranking isn't a verdict. It's not proven. Not proven and innocent are not the same thing. And I realize there are people, including many in Wyoming, people who knew this case from the inside, who will read that ranking and disagree with it strongly. But when I apply the same standard to every explanation, evidence first, assumptions counted honestly, that is where the analysis lands for me. So what can we take from this case? Amy's case is not primarily a lesson about any one suspect. It's a lesson about what happens when an investigation becomes committed to proving a theory rather than committed to testing one. Every investigation begins with a theory. You have to start somewhere. Spouses get investigated. That's correct. That's proper. No one should criticize investigators for beginning where they began. The danger is not having a theory. The danger is when a theory stops functioning as a hypothesis and starts functioning as a conclusion. When new evidence gets interpreted through the theory instead of being allowed to challenge it. When alternative pathways receive less or zero attention, not because the evidence eliminates them, but because the primary theory has already been decided. In Amy's case, that dynamic appears to have taken hold very early, and once it did, the accumulated cost was enormous. Lost evidence at the scene, lost witness opportunities, an alternative pathway that received years less development than it may have deserved, and a family that's left waiting for answers that never came. The goal of an investigation is not to identify someone. The goal of an investigation is to identify the right someone. Amy Wroe Bechtel deserved an investigation that followed evidence wherever it led, not one that decided early where evidence should lead and then spent years looking for confirmation. Yeah. That lesson doesn't belong only to Fremont County, Wyoming in 1997. It belongs to every investigation in every jurisdiction at every scale. Whenever a theory becomes more important than testing the theory, it's the victim that pays the price. Amy's case is still open. Evidence can still emerge. Forensic technology continues to advance. Memories can still be jogged. And somewhere, someone may know something that they haven't said. As long as that possibility exists, Amy's story is not finished. For the last 4 episodes, we've talked about evidence. We've talked about witnesses. We've talked about suspects. We've talked about investigative decisions, missed opportunities, competing theories, and unanswered questions. And those things matter. They matter because the truth matters. They matter because Amy matters. But Amy Wroe Bechtel is not a case file. She is not an evidence board. She's not a theory. She's not a list of suspects. She was a daughter, a wife, a coach, a trainer, a runner, a friend, a photographer, a woman who woke up on a summer morning in Wyoming expecting to come home. Nearly 30 years later, the mystery remains. But Amy was always more than the mystery. So before we leave this case, we want to spend a few moments remembering the person at the center of it. This is Down the Road by the J.J. Hawk Band. And this is Amy Wroe Bechtel. On July 24th, 1997, Amy Wroe Bechtel disappeared. That fact sits at the center of everything that we've discussed over these 4 episodes. It's the reason families still search. It's the reason investigators still ask questions. It's the reason her name is still spoken nearly 30 years later. But Amy's story did not begin on July 24th, 1997, and it shouldn't end there. Before she became a missing person, she was a runner who walked onto the University of Wyoming track team without a scholarship. She struggled in those early workouts. She wasn't the obvious talent. She wasn't the natural standout that coaches build programs around. She became exceptional because she refused to stop improving. Workout after workout, season after season, year after year, until she set the school record in the 3,000 meter, until she became team captain of both the cross country and the track programs, until she earned academic All-American recognition. And then she kept going. Marathon training, professional certification, race organization, building a career and a home and a life in the mountains of Wyoming, a place she genuinely loved and knew well. That persistence, that willingness to keep working when the results weren't obvious yet, was one of the most defining things about Amy Wroe Bechtel. She was not someone who arrived at success easily. She earned it. And the people who knew her understood that clearly. Again and again, across interviews and accounts spanning nearly 30 years, the same words appear: focused, driven, kind, dependable, quietly competitive, deeply alive. Not reckless, not careless, not someone who treated her life as disposable. Someone who built things: a career, a marriage, a home, friendships, athletic goals, a community she was proud to be a part of in Lander, Wyoming. In July of '97, that building was accelerating. She had paid off her student loans, earned her personal training certification just days before she disappeared, closed on the first house that she and Steve had purchased together, was organizing a race, was planning a move, was photographing the world around her. Everything pointed forward. Nothing pointed toward goodbye. When cases like Amy's go unsolved for decades, there's a gravitational pull toward the mystery. The theories become louder than the memories. The investigation becomes more visible than the life that existed before any of it began. We didn't want to do that. We didn't want Amy to become a case number or a talking point or a name attached to a theory. We wanted her to remain what she always was: a person, a whole person, with a history and a future and people who loved her. Her family has spent nearly 30 years carrying a kind of grief that most people never experience. Not the clean grief of a known loss, but the suspended grief of uncertainty, the space between hope and mourning that never resolves, the absence that never becomes anything final. This is the unique cruelty of a missing persons case. And Amy's family has lived it every single day since July 24th, 1997. They deserved answers. Amy deserved answers. And as long as this case remains open, the possibility exists that those answers might still come. In the meantime, the best thing that we can do is what this series has tried to do: tell the truth, ask the hard questions, refuse to accept easy certainty where certainty doesn't exist. And remember, above everything else, the person at the center of the story. Not the suspect, not the theory, not the investigation. Amy. Amy Joy Wroe Bechtel, born August 4th, 1972. Athlete, coach, photographer, runner, daughter, sister, wife, friend, a woman who loved the mountains of Wyoming, who pushed herself beyond what anyone expected of her, who built a life filled with purpose and movement and quiet determination. A woman who, on a summer afternoon in 1997, drove west out of Lander toward the mountains that she knew and loved and never came home. We don't know what happened to Amy Wroe Bechtel, but we know who she was, and we know she deserved better than this. For Amy Wroe Bechtel, for her family, for everyone still waiting for answers, we remember.
Voices lifted high like a silver flame. Every dream we chase calls us by name. With a future written line by line. Together moving past the tides of time.